Hello BookTube, my name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I've got no rhythm. And today I've got a few things to get through, so I'm filming this Thursday evening for upload overnight, so I'll be ready to go on Friday. Thursday today here in Israel was Independence Day, so no work today. Started last night, round at friends for a dinner party. We had a barbecue and some good company and good storytelling. That was a fun evening. And then today visited with a different group of friends. This is my old gang. These are the same people that we've been meeting every year for Independence Day for the last 25 years, and people I knew before that in the UK. These are my oldest friends, probably, who are all still here in Israel, and we were, I think, five couples today, probably, and we've, when we started doing this regular annual meetup, our kids were just being born, and we, every year we expanded the group. There were more and more children. Now a lot of the kids are all grown up, and a few of them married, and one of the couples became grandparents this year for the first time. So, the parents of the newborn weren't here. They were visiting children of one of the other couples somewhere else. So we were all we were all together having a barbecue, and then we Zoomed or we WhatsApped everyone in to catch up with where everyone is, and it was just a fun time. So a lot of steak and burgers and very, very spicy sausages were consumed. I hope none of that repeats on me as I'm filming this tonight, so apologies for that in advance. Other big news this week is they announced the schedule for this year's International Writers' Festival in Jerusalem. It takes place every year in May. Last year, because it was just the start of Corona, the whole thing sort of fell apart. Usually what happens, there's a week of events, live events in Jerusalem, and they have authors coming from all over the world, and quite a great selection over the years. I've seen some fabulous people. I went to a screening of Call Me By Your Name, which was preceded by a talk by Andre Asserman himself, and he signed my copy of that. I met Nathan Hill, who was in conversation about his book, The Knicks. I've met Nathan Englander there, Gary Steingart, and a few people over the years, Sean, the Icelandic writer, and different people over the years. It's been a fun time, and usually you get to actually see them. It's an intimate enough event that you can. Paul Beatty signed his book for me as well, and a few other. Anyway, it's usually intimate enough that you get to actually see and meet the people afterwards. Not just signing, but if they're hanging around, you can just chat. And some of the events are sort of light and fun. So this year it's taking place, but almost completely virtually. So all the big names, none of the authors are flying into Israel because no one's flying in anywhere, but they've got some big events, and I'll just give you a sample of some of these events. The ones that are taking place virtually are all free and available. They're going to be streamed on Facebook, so I'll leave a link to the whole festival below, and you can go and see if any of these interest you. You can sign up and just they'll send you a link ahead of the actual event. So it's running from the 3rd to the 6th of May, and the opening event is actually a conversation, Salman Rushdie in conversation with David Grossman. So that's like ringing all my bells, and I'm going to be tuning in for that. They're calling that the opening event. There's actually a thing earlier on the same evening, so this is Monday the 3rd of May, with Avni Doshi talking about burnt sugar and the literary scene in Dubai. So that's kind of interesting. Other things that are happening during the week, also, this is all streamed live on Facebook. There is Dror Mashani, who I reviewed one of his books that I read recently. That was the third in his detective. He's an Israeli writer, and he wrote them in Hebrew. I read them translated in English, but I read the third in his Avi Avrami detective series, and he is going to be in conversation with Harlan Coben. So that these will all be taking place in English, and all, as I say, free streamed. And then there's another conversation with Domenico Starnon, who's an Italian writer. I read one of his books called Ties, which was actually translated into English from the Italian by Jumbo Lahiri, and that was quite a slim novella, but he's going to be in conversation on calling the subject We Haven't Talked About Love. All right, tune in for that. That'll be fun. That's on the Tuesday already, the 4th of May. And later in the week, I can't find it. Oh, yes, there is on the 5th, which is the Wednesday. There's Jonathan Safran Foer in conversation with Asaf Avidan, who is an Israeli musician. I'm not going to sing one of his songs, but he had a hit in Europe, sort of. Anyway, Safran Foer is usually gives good interview. I've seen him here, and he signed my book. I actually saw him also in the Hay Festival in Wales, Hay on Wye. I went there with my mum when I was back in the UK a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. He's a great speaker, and I enjoyed each of his novels that I've read. He can be a little insufferable. He's like, I don't think anyone is quite as fond of Jonathan Safran Foer as Jonathan Safran Foer, but that's happening on the Wednesday, and then I've booked a live event on the Thursday evening. So Thursday the 6th of May, I think. My wife and I will be going and having a picnic at the festival takes place in this place called Mishkanot Shananim, which is a writer's retreat, but it's in the centre of Jerusalem, underneath Montefiore's windmill, and it's got the fabulous grounds. The building itself is fabulous. All the events taking place outside, and all going to be socially distanced. So I've got a double ticket. We're going to get a picnic. We're going to sit on the grass out there, and there's going to be live music, and then 4 Israeli authors in conversation, or maybe reading from their work. I imagine usually everything at the Writers' Festival is in English. Because there's no foreign authors coming in, and all the authors at the live events are all Israeli, so it's possible that evening may be in Hebrew. I hope my Hebrew is good enough to cope. But one of the authors going to be there that Thursday evening is a woman called Ya'ara Shahori, who's just written a book. Has written a book that's just been translated and published in the UK called Aquarium, and it was the book that Sean the Book Maniac brought to my attention when we had our conversation. He was talking about that, and I'm actually turns out now I've signed up for this thing, and I'm going to meet the author. Hopefully they'll have a copy of her book for sale there, because I'm not sure I'm going to get it from the UK in time if I was to order it. I usually like to read the books before I meet the authors, but if they have the English copy of the book there, I will buy it and have her sign it and read it after the fact. Anyway, that's the International Writers' Festival. I will leave the link down below if that's of any interest to you. I think Salman Rushdie and David Grossman together in conversation is something I'm super excited about. And I know there'll be other people on BookTube for whom that is a thrill as well. So now let's talk a little bit about what I've been reading this week. And the first of the book I was reading when we last met, I had started Fabian by Eric Kastner, and I finished that this week. It's a short novella and an odd little thing. This is written, I think, in 1932 and set in post First World War Germany, so set in the 20s in Berlin, a time of decadence and weirdness and high unemployment and financial insecurity for a lot of people. Of course, in when this is published, and the people that it's writing about did not think of this period as between the wars. We, with hindsight, know where this was heading. This book's written in 32 and 33. Hitler comes to power. There's the odd mention of a Jew here and there in the book, but it's not really what's about, certainly, because Kastner is not. It doesn't seem to be have any negative opinions of that. What was surprising to me was, I think of 33, Hitler coming to power, and then the Nazis increasing. There is a Nazi mentioned in the book. There is a sort of pathetic shootout on the street that our hero Jacob Fabian stumbles across between a Nazi and a communist. That's the dialectic here in 20s Berlin. So there were the National Socialists were a thing, and they were in opposition to the communists. And there's this sort of weird, one wounds the other in the leg, and it's all a bit pathetic. And Fabian he passes through this world and comments on these things. It's a bit about the decadence of Berlin, which I've only sort of really encountered in Christopher Isherwood's I'm a Camera, which was the basis for where Sally Bowles, the basis for the movie Cabaret, Tomorrow Belongs to Me, that kind of world. And Fabian passes through this world, and he early on he's in some nightclub where all sorts of strange things are going on, and he ends up being dragged out of the nightclub by a woman who takes him home with her, and they are in her apartment, and her husband turns up. And the husband is all like, well, no, don't worry, this is absolutely fine, this is our arrangement, and please feel free to go ahead, and I wouldn't dream of interfering. And Fabian is this sort of wide-eyed, a cynic, but also an innocent, and he doesn't really want to have anything to do with it at this point, and he leaves. But as he goes through the rest of the world, he sort of reminded me, this is a weird reference point, reminded me a little bit of Tom Cruise in Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, as this sort of innocent who is, people are trying to make moves on him, male and female, wherever he goes, and it's a sort of very weird, dreamlike existence that he goes through. So that ends in a weird CGI orgy, where this not so much, but there are brothels and sex workers and weird relationships going on. He's working for an advertising agency, but finds that very demeaning and parasitic way to make a living. It's a lot about financial insecurity and the desperate lives that people led and the decisions they made in order to be to keep their heads above water financially. And it's quite a sad and melancholy fable. It felt a little bit like a Russian novellas, a Russian Victorian. It got a little bit of that about it. And as in all of these things, plot ensues. It's not necessarily a happy book, but I found it a very worthwhile book. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. I thought it might be a little bit more happy-go-lucky and decadent Berlin. I think it's quite a serious little book that worked for me. So recommend if you can get hold of Fabian. And it goes by a number of other titles. The New York Review of Books published it, their own version of it under a different title. Going to the Dogs, I think it was called for that. But quite good. Fabian, Eric Kastner, enjoyed that very much. Thank you. What I've got up next is the book, the only book I've had delivered in the last year, but I ordered this from Blackwell's in the UK, and they sent it all the way to Israel. It took about 8 weeks to get here, but this has a cover price of £9.99. I paid £8.99, and they sent it with that free shipping to Israel. And this is David Baddiel's Jews Don't Count. A few things about David Baddiel. So let's talk we'll talk about what Jews Don't Count and what he means, and we'll talk a bit about David Baddiel. But just to get us started, we'll do a bit of book blurb bingo. So we've got on the back here a blurb by Jonathan Safran Foer, the aforementioned Jonathan Safran Foer, who I've liked very much, read his novels. Howard Jacobson, who is a Mancunian Jewish author in the UK, won the Booker Prize a few years ago for the Finkler Question. I didn't read the Finkler Question, but I read Kaluki Nights, which is good. And then also Hadley Freeman, who is a Guardian journalist and a Jewish writer as well. Anyway, so that's the book. So I've read her book. She wrote a book about 80s movies called Life Moves Pretty Fast, which is a Ferris Bueller quote. So I got full bingo. I've read something by each of the people blurbing this book. Okay. If you're from the UK, you will be very familiar with David Baddiel. If you're not from the UK, I imagine the name means absolutely nothing to you. He's a famous comedian in the UK and has been for the best part of 30 years. He started out as in comedy, sketch comedy. He was in the group. There were 4 guys in a show called The Mary Whitehouse Experience. I'm not even going to try and explain why they were called The Mary Whitehouse Experience. Then it was him and one of his fellow comedians, a guy called Rob Newman, and they did their own double act, and I think were the first comedians. It's often said they were the first comedians to play Wembley Arena. So when they went on tour, they played this indoor arena that can sit around sort of 9,000-10,000 people, and this was comedy as rock and roll, and at the start of that in the 90s, and they were absolutely huge, and then they went their separate ways, and Baddiel continued as a solo stand-up, forming tours over the years, and also started a second career as a novelist, and a handful of novels for adults which were well received, if not huge sellers, and he has transitioned in the last 8-10 years into a novelist for children, and that's not YA, I think, squarely aimed at younger children, and has become hugely successful, and I think those do sell very well, and that's become a huge part of his career. His, on a side note, his partner of many years is a comedian called Morwenna Banks, who was very, very briefly on Saturday Night Live. I think she did 4 episodes of one season of Saturday Night Live. These days, probably better known as the voice of Mummy Pig in Peppa Pig. So that's Morwenna Banks, who's David Baddiel's partner. I went to school with David Baddiel, so this was not a Jewish school, but there were a lot of Jewish people there. David Baddiel is about 5 years older than me, and I remember him from school, and he's done over the years done comedy about things that I remember being there. He took part in a review just as he was leaving school, and there wasn't much they could do about it, but the bunch of students who were about to leave the school put on a review where they brutally mocked several teachers in ways that were really, really harsh, and perhaps some of those teachers never really recovered from a room full of 1,000 boys laughing at them and highlighting their weaknesses and their foibles up on stage, and we sat in the audience. But he's spoken about it, and I was actually in the audience that day when that happened, and it stayed with me. Some of the jokes and some of the lines from that show, which I saw 35 years ago, have stayed with me. And he's written about that. So what is Jews Don't Count? It's a polemic. This was written for the Times Literary Supplement, and they published. They decided they were going to publish a series of polemics and ask certain authors to talk on certain subjects, and suggested they put together about 10,000 words. And Baddiel sat down. He said that he sat down to write this and was unable to stop at 10,000 words, and ended up about 28,000 words. So this is a sort of large print. It's about 120 pages, but I read this in one sitting, and you can as well. So the thesis is Jews don't count, and I'll give you an example of what he means when he says Jews don't count. In February of this year, a gentleman called Anas Sarwar was elected leader of the Scottish Labour Party. And after his election as head of the Scottish Labour Party, Angela Rayner, who is the deputy leader of the Labour Party in the UK, tweeted the following. I want to read it out. She wrote, "I am so proud our party has elected the first ever ethnic minority leader of a political party anywhere in the UK." The first ever ethnic minority leader of a political party anywhere in the UK. It wasn't long before someone pointed out to Angela Rayner that the day she was elected to Parliament was the last day that the leader of the Labour Party was a gentleman called Ed Miliband, who was a Jew. The Conservative Party had formerly been led by Michael Howard, who was also Jewish. We don't even have to go back to Benjamin Disraeli to try and work out whatever the hell he was. But certainly in Ms. Rayner's lifetime, there had been two Jewish leaders of major political parties. But for some reason, she did not consider these ethnic minority party leaders. There was a small brouhaha about this, and it was discussed on BBC News. They had a panel, and they were discussing, asked the question to the panel, well, are Jews an ethnic minority? None of the panel were Jewish. There were 4 talking heads being interviewed by a BBC presenter about whether or not Jews are an ethnic minority, and none of the people being asked to pontificate on this question were themselves Jewish. And this is kind of the starting point for Baddiel's hypothesis that Jews don't count. I don't want to. I'm not sure where I quite sit on this, but it's a very persuasive idea, and he comes out with some very sort of interesting examples, and talks about the way Judaism and specifically anti-Semitism is considered as part of a spectrum or a hierarchy of racism, where certainly in the UK, his perception is that anti-Semitism is just not really as bad as real racism. And all this is in inverted commas. And this is what he's pointing out, that for many people, and he's specifically talking in this book, he's aimed at the progressive left, of which I consider myself part, and I think many people on BookShoe probably do as well. And in the UK, his sense is that amongst the progressive left, anti-Semitism is not treated with the same seriousness as as racism towards people of colour, racism towards Muslims, bigotry towards LGBTQ plus people, and other forms of bigotry. And that's his hypothesis, that Jews don't count. And he talks about that feeling and why that is, and the prevalence in his experience of that feeling on the left amongst progressive, which he identifies as part of the progressive left. And this is not because he ignores anti-Semitism from the right. That's something we're all familiar with. We understand the fascism and right-wing anti-Semitism, but he's specifically focusing on anti-Semitism from people who would describe themselves as anti-racists, who very proudly talk about being part of the progressive left, and many in the Labour Party, for example, would talk about how they are the party of anti-racism, and yet over the last few years there was a real sense that the Labour Party didn't really understand anti-Semitism or how to deal with it. And for those of you who follow UK politics, there was a real sense coming up to the last general election that there were some problems in the Labour Party with anti-Semitism, and the then Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn made a very clear announcement that there was anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and anyone who disagreed with that was part of the problem. And yet there was a sense that they were failing to deal with the anti-Semitism that existed on the left. So that's the hypothesis for Jews Don't Count, and it's a sharply written, occasionally scathing, backed up with some evidence, although a lot of that evidence is tweet-based, and so you can take that as you will. But there's some great points in here also. He uses a phrase which he admits to that he did not coin, that he calls, he says Jews are Schrodinger's whites, so that the whiteness of Jews changes based on the perspective of the observer. And what does he mean here? That we know that on the white supremacist, the far right movement does not consider Jews white at all. And if you look at the statements of white supremacists in America, when they talk about America being for whites only, they very clearly exclude Jews from that group. They do not consider Jews to be white people. And then when you go on the other end of the spectrum, you have the left, which very clearly considers Jews to be absolutely whites and to be part of the privileged white and not part of the oppressed or the downtrodden, despite the fact that in the UK Jews represent a very, very tiny proportion, of very clearly a minority in the UK. There's roughly a UK population of, say, 60 million plus. There are around 220,000 Jewish people in the UK. And yet the left considers Jews absolutely part of the mainstream, part of the establishment, and there's a sense that Jews do not need protection because of a whole number of reasons. So this idea of Schrodinger's whites, I think, is a really telling point of what the Jews are, and this is why Jewish people were not, in Angela Rayner's statement, she did not even think about Jews when she spoke about an ethnic minority. In the UK, they use this phrase, BAME, black, Asian, and minority ethnic, the equivalent, I guess, of people of colour in the US. It's a very UK-specific term, and surveys have been done that the overwhelming majority of British people do not consider Jews to be part of that BAME collective. That even, are Jews an ethnicity? Are they a minority ethnicity? And this is the hypothesis of Jews Don't Count. I think it's very worth your while reading, and I whizzed through it and found it provoking and interesting. It wasn't a perfect read, and I'll tell you for why. It's very British. I think the concerns here, and it's a terrible criticism to make. David Baddiel is British, and this is his experience, his lived experience of racism and sort of racist microaggressions against Jews in the UK. It's very British. I'm not sure how well it will translate to an American audience. I think being British in the UK is very, very different to being British in America. And when I say America, I think being British in New York, being Jewish in New York or Los Angeles is very, very different than being Jewish in other parts of America. So the experience of Jews in the UK, I think, is very specific and very clearly addressed here. I think it's a lot about microaggressions rather than anti-Semitism from the left. It's about microaggressions rather than anti-Semitism from the right, which is about being punched or spat on or chased down the street, all of which I experienced in my time growing up in the UK, and none of which was happening from the progressive left. But my experiences of microaggressions in my time in the UK and my time online in various left-wing groups is all founded in the left. And I don't hang around Tory or conservative groups on Facebook, but I've spent time in plenty of left-wing groups, and there are daily anti-Semitic microaggressions, which are kind of, and the moderators will go, you really shouldn't say that, but it's kind of swept under the carpet because hashtag Jews don't count. So some of this was very familiar to me and very recognisable. I'm not sure how well it will work for people who from the States, where I think Jews just have a totally different profile than Jewish people in the UK. I think if I have to make another criticism of it, it's very much about David Baddiel, which, again, it's a tough criticism to make of an author who's writing this and it's written as a polemic, but I'm not sure he is wholly successful, even though I've just said some of it's recognisable. I'm not sure he's wholly successful in universalising his experience. There's a lot of tweets that David Baddiel is very active on Twitter, where his bio is David Baddiel, Jew. So he's kind of provocative about it. I don't see why calling yourself a Jew should be provocative, but it's there, and that's been his Twitter bio since he started. But in here he sort of relitigates some of his Twitter spats, which I think is very Baddiel centric rather than, as I say, universalising the experience. It's a fine bit of work, and he's a terrific writer. And there's plenty here to get your teeth into, and I think the response from it has been about, well, this is starting a conversation, and I think that is a great place to start. For my part, I would like to see this conversation continue and someone to put together sort of a more rigorous academic study on anti-Semitism in the UK and sort of British microaggressions and how people feel differently about racism towards Jews as opposed to other forms of racism and bigotry, because I think what he's talking about here is real. I felt it in my experience. I'm not going to talk about my anecdotes because then they become my stories and they're not terribly interesting. But I think there's something recognisable here. I think it's worth your time, and if you're interested at all in anti-Semitism in 21st century UK, I think there's something to talk about. David Baddiel's Jews Don't Count. After I literally whizzed through that in one evening, and after that I had a bit of a comfort read and came back to some Sherlock Holmes short stories. This is the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, and this is the 4th volume that I've read. So according to Wikipedia, I'm going through the collections that Conan Doyle put out in chronological order. So we started with the novel Sign of Four. Anyway, so far I've read 2 novels and 1 earlier collection, which was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, I think. So this is the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, and this, without too many spoilers, the last story in this is about Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty and their final fateful meeting in the Rickenback Falls, because this was the point where Conan Doyle decided he was going to kill off Sherlock Holmes. Well, again, I don't want to reveal too many spoilers, but there are several collections and novels. The Hand of the Baskervilles comes after this, and then there are more Sherlock Holmes short stories. So he was revived, but this was super fun. It's an absolute romp. This is very end of Victorian era. So this is the sort of 1890s. I think this was written and published, and they're just terrifically modern and witty, and the mysteries are terrific, and Sherlock Holmes and Watson's relationship is fun. I don't mean fun in a Benedict Cumberbatch kind of way, but in a of its time way. The banter is real. The observations are believable and accessible, and I'm having great fun with these. I never read Sherlock Holmes when I was younger, so I'm slowly working my way through these collected editions, and I'm going to read more of them until I get to the end of them, because as a lover of detective fiction and crime fiction, so much of it clearly comes from here, so that's been great fun. And then I'm just started, and this is what I'm going to do this weekend, another trollop. I've got here the Eustace Diamonds. This is the third in the Palliser series, and got a nice 700-page trollop to get through, while I'm still don't have any new books coming in, and all my books are still waiting for me at my mum's, and I still haven't got there, and I pushed off the flight again, not for another month now am I due to fly, so this has been on my TBR for a while, and I'm going to read a trollop. This should take me at least best part of a week, if not two, but always good value, and occasionally a bit of anti-Semitism. It seems to be a bit of a theme, but fingers crossed there won't be too much in this one, but trollop does like to sort of drop every now and then something sort of hateful in there, but essentially they're sort of fun Victorian stuff. So this is up next. That's all I've got for you today. Take care. Bye.